Well, it's just gone 7:32. We are coming to you live from the Results Operations Center, the National Results Operations Center here in Midrand, Gallagher Estate. Renowned political analyst Ebrahim Fakir joins me in studio. Ebrahim, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Nice to see you in person.
Any surprises so far?
Lots of them. I honestly didn't expect the ANC to be this low. I expected them to be low, but not this low. So that's the first thing. The second thing that surprised me is that there are a sheer number of people who voted for a combination of Gayton McKenzie, Kenny Kunene, and Jacob Zuma. I mean, just for a moment, think about it. Jacob Zuma, I can understand. At the moment, we're talking about a party which has got about 378,000 votes. But 120,000 odd votes for the Patriotic Alliance, that is really shocking. And it shocked me in a way because I never thought that they would be very serious players, but clearly having money behind you, particularly from some questionable sources, helps. And number two, this kind of appeal to a very narrow ethnic chauvinist identity appears to have worked in South African politics for both the MK and the Patriotic Alliance. And all the parties which had a slightly more cosmopolitan outlook didn't appear to do very well. So it appears as if apartheid's conditioning of identities is much more persistent than we might have thought. It hasn't broken the stranglehold of people's loyalties to their ethnic or racial identities. You know, religious identity is one thing. This is an identity of an entirely different order.
Now, Raisi Mzansi and Bosa, right? Mmusi Maimane has got political profile. He was the official leader of the opposition for a number of years in Parliament. He was South Africa's Barack Obama. His fallout with Alan Ziller dominated headlines for weeks. And yet, him together with Raisi Mzansi, that seemed to be quite popular on social media, they seemed to be well funded, they seemed to have their policies somewhat streamlined. But they're kind of like on par in terms of votes with a party like Al-Jamaah.
Yeah, that's another surprising thing which I didn't pick up on yet. I haven't looked very closely, but I think there's three things which explain this. First is in the case of Mmusi Maimane and Boldman South Africa, it was a pretty planned campaign. Remember when Mmusi Maimane was leader of the Democratic Alliance, he actually had the entire apparatus of the party behind him. And that's, whether you like it or not, fairly significant. It is a huge operational undertaking. They've got a sophisticated branch structure, they've got activists on the ground, they're well resourced, they are well networked, and along with the ANC, they can cover every voting station in this country. I don't think Mmusi Maimane was able to replicate that on his own party. And so here's, the surprising thing, so the thing that doesn't square is if you take everything I've been saying about the fact that some parties with large amount of money did well, then I say parties like the DA which have a fairly expensive network of officers and branch structures and resources on the ground and they can reach every voting station, that also didn't appear to do too much for them. So what explains Raisi Mzansi? Because they had both. They had a large amount of funding and they had a large presence. They may not have a formal branch structure, but remember through the Rivonia Circle and their own listening campaign, they literally had community meetings around the country. They said that they had people who were signing up for them, up to about 500,000 people, right? That should automatically have translated into at least 500,000 votes. And they're not looking anywhere close to that quantum of votes at the moment. So the only thing that strikes me is that message of moderate, centrist, what some would call it sensible is not what played out in the selection. People were looking for messaging in the extremes, which might explain also why the other parties that have been part of the establishment, no matter how cosmopolitan you think they are, didn't perform very well. The ANC, the DA, all the others, the IFP included.
Is this South Africa now kind of following global trends? Because there has been this inclining, if you like, or rallying behind the right and the extreme right. We've seen in the US with the rise of Donald Trump and the real possibility of him coming back into office a second time, and people can't understand how that would happen in America, of all places. Are we kind of now falling in line with similar trends where people are looking at extremes rather than the more cosmopolitan, embracing, encompassing parties?
The short question is, haven't we always been that way? In some ways, we've led the pack. People say, South Africa follows global trends. I think in some cases we set them. So, if you remember the protest culture which started at the turn of the century with the anti-Seattle movement, the anti-globalization movement, the anti-neoliberal movement, the climate justice movement, all these kind of shock tactics. In London in 2016, the children out in the streets because of university fees and so on. South Africa's been having protest culture since before the turn of the century, before about 1998. Right? So the first trend we led. Remember when Jacob Zuma took over in the ANC from 2005, what was his rallying call? He had 3 rallying calls. A, Thabo Mbeki is too aloof and outside of the normal mainstream. I'm not, I'm a man of the people. Number 1. Number 2, he is too exclusive, he is too elite. I am inclusive. I'm going to consult all of you, including Labour and the Labour movement, only, of course, to turn his back on them and then to absorb the Labour movement and actually destroy them. Because today, what is Cosatu? It's a shadow of its former self. Right? And the third thing that he appealed to through the campaign is, do you remember the t-shirts, perhaps you're too young, I'm not. There were those t-shirts saying 100% Zulu.
No, I remember those.
You remember those t-shirts? And campaign on this kind of ticket of the ANC's had all these Xhosa presidents, but never had a Zulu president. 100% Zulu born.
It was outside his trial, right? The rape trial. They were wearing those shirts.
Exactly. And that continued all throughout the campaign leading up to the ANC's conference in 2007. And remember, when was the ANC's best performance in KZN? It was under his watch. So, far from following that trend, I think we set in train that motion of politics. Now, to come back to an earlier question you raised about, are we following global trends or what? If you actually want to understand why the people vote the way they are, and I don't want to make too much of it, because look, the rational center, if you want to call it that, of the ANC and the DA combined is still the majority of voters. The extremities are just the ones which are showing up for this election because they've done so spectacularly well. But the numbers are not that huge, right? I mean, the MK party will end up at about 9-10% at most. The Patriotic Alliance probably 3 or 4. But so it's just showing up because it's spectacular. The real centrist sort of sentiment still lies between the two major parties. So why are we feeling that this is so spectacular? This is so shocking to us? And I think it's shocking because all of the other voices when we thought would be vying for a more considered political approach were left at the wayside. And what does that say about the society we're in? Now I'm saying if you look at the nature and the character of the society we're in, high levels of crime, so poverty, unemployment that we know, but think of the moral and social crisis and ethical crisis in the society. And this is not new. This has been going on from pre-apartheid through the post-apartheid, throughout democracy. High levels of violent crime, high levels of interpersonal violence, high rates of murder, high rates of femicide, high rates of rape, including of babies and the elderly, cash in transit heists. You name the type of crime, it happens. That's on the low end of things. Think of the middle range of things. Cartels, construction mafia, the mafia involved in state tenders, procurement, public spending. Take it one level higher, global organized crime, trafficking, human trafficking. All of that is present here. And all of that is starting to play out in the political firmament. I hate to say, people don't like talking about this, but take a long, hard look at the society itself and look at what patterns it's telling you, even in the way in which its voting patterns are now showing.
Let's talk a little bit about the EFF. I mean, they're standing a chance now of losing their third position to the newcomers, the MK. Is it that the niche that they were playing in has now been saturated? Is that what's happening to the EFF?
In part it's saturated, but in part I just think they had a very lackluster campaign, in the sense that they came out, there were a few spectacular stunts. Their birthday party was a little too far away from the actual election campaign. You remember where Malema was sort of fated and lifted off a rising podium. Those were all very spectacular, but didn't translate into the campaign. But I think they've always, and I've always maintained that they would be a 10%, 12% party. This time I thought they might go up to about 13 or 14, but nothing more than that. So I think there are two things which have happened. First is the appeal of that kind of politics, though it was extreme at the time, now doesn't seem so extreme because you've got more extreme. You've got the patriotic right, which is extreme in a different way, and you've got the MK party, which is also extreme in a different way. But the MK party is extreme not as it's popularly fated out there as a leftist party. They're far from a leftist party. Jacob Zuma is actually like a feudal overlord. Because what is the trajectory, what is the campaign message of the MK party? We want to reverse the constitution. Don't like the constitution. We want the parliamentary sovereignty. That means a crude majority, 50%. I mean, you get a majority, you rule the roost. We don't like certain things, you're going to get rid of it from the constitution. We don't like this thing about separation of powers, separation of functions, constraints of power on authority, give more power to traditional leaders. Those are all very feudal ideas. So that's what they're standing for. Why someone assume that they are left? I don't know. So he is saying to us that the kind of radical leftist politics purportedly put out by the EFF didn't find flavor, firstly, and secondly, I think the society has started to see through what the EFF leadership was about. It's about megalomania and it's about money. And they are promising ideology, the politics, the policy is a front for accumulation. So it sounds great, promising you all these things, but you have to deliver it. I am in a position to have done so, whether in Johannesburg, whether in Ekurhuleni, wherever I have been in power, and I've been in power now for a good 2 years, I've been dispensed the patronage I said I would to the communities and constituencies. I said I would. But the leaders who are in office are certainly doing very well. So I think people have seen through that, and this election I think they saw flames, because they're firstly more extreme people than them. The message was different. They were not as spectacular as they once were. That kind of spectacularity is left its edge. This is the consequence.
Now, if you look at the two provinces that are under the spotlight, and that is KZN and Gauteng. Now, the politicians will get nothing out of them. They'll say, oh, it's still a long way to go in terms of counting, etc. But, you know, I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to see a drastic jump either way, upwards or downwards for any one of the political parties, something like 10% or more. So if we work with the numbers that we have, what's likely to happen now? Do you think the ANC would be more comfortable reaching out to MK and the EFF, going into coalition, Gauteng, KZN and nationally? Or would they perhaps go into coalition with the IFP and DA in KZN to keep out the MK?
Well, this is a really tough question, because you're now asking questions not about the calculation of what happens between the different parties, but you have to ask questions about what are the calculations within each party. So that's the first set of things you've got to ask. What's the calculation inside the party? Second, you've got to ask at what level, what percentage do they end up? So if Cyril Ramaphosa leading the ANC ends up at anywhere between 43 and 45%, the lives are automatically out of him. You either want to get rid of him. If they don't get rid of him as leader of the ANC, they will impose on him which the dominant faction at the time would want as a preferred party. And in all likelihood, it would be MK, EFF. Why? Because that faction would say, this is our former leader. How can we repudiate? The other one was a former youth leader. How can we repudiate? We've got to bring them back into the fold. And part of the argument would be if you take the ANC before its fracture into those different parties and add up the tally, it would come up to the old ANC level of support of 65-66%. So we need to consolidate it, whatever's happened water under the bridge. And on the face of it, that sounds like a completely rational approach to it. But it's rational in another way too. It continues and it allows them to distribute the spoils, continued distribution of spoils to office. But again, it would be exactly what you've had happening over the last 30 years. A particular rent-seeking, predatory type of politics. And it will be stable for a good 3 or 4 years, and then the bun fight between them starts to happen. So I think this is a moment in which it's a natural breakup of the constituencies of support that they have. The alternative is if President Ramaphosa leading the ANC ends up at between 56 and 49, he's in a slightly better position to negotiate who the coalition partners will be. Now for institutional stability, some kind of market stability, we don't like the markets, you can dismiss them all you want. The truth of the matter is that the level of the currency and the level of investment, whether it's hot money or not, matters for the JSE. And that is going to go if there isn't a coalition that the markets can actually live with. So in the short term, if they don't go for that approach, volatility in the economy is going to be. Yeah, people will argue that the real economy will start to emerge, and all of that is true. But then you must accept that for a period of 3 or 4 years, there will be serious volatility in the economy and really serious difficulty. So that's just the ANC's equation. MK's got its own set of internal calculations. If we want something from these fellows in KZN, what are they prepared to give us nationally? So no calculation for any party is simple. Everything is depending on what do they give us in areas where we want something, and what can we give them in areas where we are in control. Now notice the one thing in all of the things that I've been saying. Every calculation is based on what is in it for our party, not what is in it for public institutions, or for stability, or for society as a whole. Now, unfortunately, this is true for all of the different parties, and they're going to go into this with that negotiating framework. There's an alternative negotiating framework, but that's if any of them want to listen. The most sensible would be for an ANC-DA grand coalition. And for the ANC to bite the bullet and say, irrespective of what anyone else offers us elsewhere in the provinces, we must take a principled approach and go with this grand coalition. Alternatively, take an approach where we are the largest party and we propose a government of national unity in which we say all parties which get support over 8%, 9%, we offer you a proportionate executive portfolio. Point number one. Point number two, let's sit down and say, what are our priority areas? Housing, crime and policing. I'm just hypothetically bringing this up, right? At what level can we pay expenditure? At what level, what are the priority projects? And who can we agree on to be the head of the Directors General? If you can reach that kind of detailed agreement, you've got a way out. Short of that, you're looking at the negotiations that have happened at local government in the metros, and then it's a bun fight, and then it's brinkmanship, and then I show you up, and you show me up, and then it's a brittle coalition against a fragile one. And I don't think the society nationally can afford that. Other countries can afford this period of instability because their institutions are stable enough. Here you don't. You're talking about a 40% unemployment rate, massive inequality, increasing rates of poverty, disease burdens. You can't afford that in a society like this.
Finally, Ibrahim, what's your assessment of the Muslim vote? I mean, it's impossible to know exactly who Muslims voted for, but if we look at the trends and the areas, I mean, Western Cape, there's been raised eyebrows considering the kind of protests we've seen in favor of the Palestinians, the kind of denouncing and demonizing of the DA. Yet it would seem like, in the main, the Muslim community in the Western Cape still voted the DA, or they did not vote for the ANC. We had Nomvula Mokanyane here about an hour ago, and she said, well, you know, we didn't support Palestine for votes. They've made their bed now, they've got to lie in it. Then you've got these so-called Muslim parties, you know, with votes between them. What's your assessment of how the Muslim community voted?
Well, I've never believed that there was ever a block Muslim vote, because I don't think there ever was one. People's motivation, the Muslims' motivation for voting, are based not purely on the divinely inspired, because these are matters of temporal concern. They are matters of your everyday concern, and you vote on that basis. And I think that there is an ethical defense of doing so, of not always voting on what you think are your values. But by and large, I think the Muslim vote was split between the ANC, the DA, and a small number which went to Muslim parties, if you want to call them that. But it was quite fragmented, at least the vote for the Muslim parties. In the main, it was split between the ANC, the DA, and the stay away. And I think, despite all the noise which has been made about this big turnout, you're going to find at the end, the turnout is not that big, and that the delays are attributable to a range of other problems and issues, including administrative funding, organizing, logistics, the third ballot, all of that. But I'm unconvinced that there was ever a Muslim vote to begin with, and that Muslims have one singular motivation for how they were going to vote, or that Palestine and the ICJ case was the overriding determining factor for how they were going to vote. Because, you know, it's often easy in some senses to say, I'll vote my values and I'll vote my ideology and I'll vote my conscience, when actually your material day-to-day benefits actually lie somewhere else. And for a long time, I think we've missed the trick. And that trick is, there was an assumption that there is a Muslim elite which will guide how the rest of the community will follow. And the material conditions and material interests are vastly different. We lose sight of the fact that actually the majority of Muslims in this country don't have private medical aid, cannot afford going to private schools, are not having more than 1 or 2 cars at their private disposal, and a large number of them actually are dependent on public services. So it's in their interest, no matter how high-minded it might sound, to ensure that they are actually voting for a party which materially delivers certain things to them, which makes their lives better and simpler. And they can't be criticized for that. Any rational voter votes in that way. Look at every other voter which has voted either on the basis of their identity or they voted on the basis of their interests. And Muslims have done the same.
Absolutely. Ibrahim, shukran so much for your time and for chatting to us. Enlightening as always.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum.
Listeners, we sign off for this evening. The rolling coverage will continue on our social media platforms, and Rana Habib Bobat and the morning team will be back with you tomorrow morning just after 7 with election coverage here from the Results Operations Center in Gallagher Estate, Midrand. From myself, Suleiman Rabat, until tomorrow afternoon, just after Maghrib Salah, when I rejoin you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah.
Maulana Timo will once again
you with the NC?
abroad
No.
for Qurban.
No.
Many people in the village
I'm
the poverty line and only in tune at the day of Eid
the
al-Adha.
technical advisor to Goodluck Jonathan.
Oh, okay. He's
He's an observer.